If you ask me what the American dream is, it's easy to say that it's to become a part of the middle class. What I mean is a family with a decent, steady income, a home, and a considerably secure future for themselves and their kids. Basically, it's the ability to work, save, and acquire assets while doing all of that. And yes, that makes sense. Or rather, that would have made sense if I was making this video about 40 years ago. As I said, this was the well-revered American dream, but now, it seems even the average Americans have become too busy to find sleep, let alone dream. See, the middle class has been a very controversial concept from time immemorial, with several people having different meanings for it. Economists say the middle class can be determined by dividing the total population of the United States into 5 and taking out the middle 3 categories. At the same time, other laymen like you and me think it depends on how much money we earn. Now, I'm forced to ask myself, which definition should I believe and run with? Well, honestly, I'm taking none. Listen, the subjectivity of the middle class is screaming, but we've all somehow decided to turn deaf ears. For example, if the middle class is determined by how much we earn, are we saying someone who earns $100,000 annually in Los Angeles is the same as someone making such an enormous amount of money in Cleveland? Come on, that's bollocks, and you'll agree. The same applies to the Economist's definition, but somehow their school of thought has been a green snake under the grass for a very long time. I mean, having a supposed category of people without clear borders, a range of figures, and other defining blurry elements has been one of the curses the average American working their asses off every day has been plagued with. Sadly, the rich and the powerful know this and have been piggybacking on their ignorance to continue filling their never satisfied pockets. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and take things very slowly. I promise we'll get back to this before the end of the video. To be fair, yes, the middle class actually exists. Because, of course, we are a bunch of different people with different financial capacities, and we really need to know our place. However, while this is true, it's also true that what the middle class actually means has been changing over the years. Think about it. Today, the cost of housing, education, healthcare, and so on have skyrocketed, consuming unthinkably large shares of household budgets. As a member of the so-called middle class, you and your family now have to work longer hours, manage newer kinds of stress, and still shoulder bigger financial responsibilities as they have now risen more than your income. Let's examine how the supposed American middle class has changed over the last 4 to 6 decades to put this into a clearer perspective. The first and most apparent indicator is household income. Overall, household incomes have considerably grown since 1970. However, ironically, those of households that we all believe belong to the middle class have refused to climb as much as others. Well, by others I mean the upper income households. A study by the Pew Research Center seems to tell us all that we need to know. Let's begin with the lower income class. In 1970, the lower income household income was averaged as $20,604. From then until 2020, this category of people experienced a 45% increase in their average income to just $29,963. The middle class household also suffers the same fate, growing by just 50% between 1970 and 2020, from $59,934 to $90,131. To put this into perspective, let's compare the cost of living, particularly focusing on the price of cars, houses, and essential goods like bread or milk, in relation to average salaries in the 1970s and today. In the 1970s, the average salary in the US was around $7,500 to $10,000 per year, depending on the specific year and industry. Let's take the median of this range as $8,750. Let's begin with cars. In the 1970s, a new car typically cost around $3,000 to $5,000, with luxury models reaching up to $10,000. So a car could represent about 34% to 57% of a yearly salary. Not bad, yeah? Well, the average cost of a new car today is around $40,000. Considering the median salary in the US today roughly $50,000 to $60,000, this car could represent about 67 to 80% of a yearly salary. Things look even messier when we examine the cost of houses and basic goods. In the 1970s, the median home price was around $24,000 to $38,000. This means a house could represent around 274% to 434% of a yearly salary. Similarly, a gallon of milk in the 1970s was around $1.15, and a loaf of bread was just around 25 to 35 cents. Now, let's fast forward to today. The median home prices in the US today is around $350,000 to $400,000. This means a house could represent around 583% to 800% of a yearly salary. As for milk, the price has risen to around $3.5 to $4 per gallon, and a loaf of bread is now around $2.5 to $4. These are alarming percentage increases in these prices, and sadly, the average American annual salary increases cannot be compared to this. And now we begin to wonder why politics are not responding to this massive growth in the cost of living, stiffening life out for the average American household. To be honest, a lot is associated with this reality, but one that transcends them all is the top 1% who hold a lot of power. Listen, these are not the ones with a yearly salary of 200 to 300k. These are the real top guys, but we'll get back to this later in the video. See, these figures tell us what we need to know lying below the surface. These politicians always talk about the middle class too much in the media, but it appears they are technically weaponizing poverty to score cheap political points. They never stop campaigning with promises to create more jobs, talking vaguely about expanding the middle class, and singling out specific high costs like medical premiums. But when was the last time you heard a politician talk about credit card debt? The less these kinds of problems are talked about, the more individual they feel, as opposed to a reality for millions of Americans. Now, since the upper region continues to amass wealth and the middle region is crying foul, we can easily think people who can no longer sustain the middle class requirements, as described by economists mentioned earlier in this video, must have been slipping down into the lower income class. Well, this is where the truth becomes exposed to our faces, making us connect the dots and familiarize ourselves with our various realities. You see, the truth is, there is no more lower income class. We've been gradually united into one big chunk, with the top guys peeping at us from the windows of their skyscrapers. Let me break this down for you. I want you to see the bigger picture of our society today. Every single one of us can be divided into two categories. One, people who need to work actively to make money. You can call them active income earners. And secondly, people who don't need to work actively for their money. Let's call them passive income earners. Honestly, those names are merely to make you feel good. The truth is that we have the working class and the top 1% class. And no, working class does not necessarily mean poor, as we've been made to believe. As the name suggests, it means anyone and everyone working actively to make a living, regardless of the type of job. Now, this is where it gets exciting and eye-opening. I've talked about how politicians actually profit from all of these scenarios, so there's no real point in going over it again. Instead, let's focus on the real culprits who are also somehow backed by politicians, the top 1% class. The top 1% class is famous for profiteering. What matters to them the most is their profit, and every other thing can be damned for all they care, including the workers who they use to amass these profits. Whether it involves pushing wages down or crazily increasing their prices without increasing wages under the guise they are suffering global inflation, these big corporations always do what they have to do to protect their money and make even more money. Within all of these analyses, there seems to be a very grey category consisting of people who own a small business but still have to work to not only make ends meet, but also reinvest in this small business. See, the truth is there are no grey areas with the classification explored in this video. If you work for someone to make a living, then you belong to the working class. You cannot be in the middle. It's either you are working for someone or people are working for you. Listen, this is a cycle enabled by the politicians who are also exploiting this to score cheap political campaign points to win over our hearts and vote them into power. And do you know why this happens? It's because most people consider themselves middle class. And you know whose fault it is? Of course, these same politicians who have made the average American believe they belong to the middle class. In all scenarios, this supposed middle class has always been at the receiving end, and sadly, it doesn't look like this will be stopping anytime soon. Remember, the top 1% class always wants to make profits, and the politician always wants to be voted into power. And then, there is us who have become pawns in their games. So yes, there is still the middle class, but it is far from the American dream middle class we know. Thank you for joining us. Now go ahead and explore our other videos on the Declassified channel. Until that time, stay safe and keep digging for the truth. Bye bye for now.